So, last week we took you inside the refugee camps of Turkey to meet the people who fled the Syrian war. Today we're going to take you to Lebanon to hear from some of the Australians working on the front line. Just to warn you, a couple of images and stories here which you might find a little confronting. Here's part 2 of my special investigation. Beirut used to be known as the Paris of the East, and certainly there are plush pockets of this city that retain a sense of high-end glamour. But after years of conflict, most Lebanese are doing it tough. This country of 4 million simply can't afford 1 million refugees. Of course, no one does it tougher than the refugees themselves. Many have fled their homeland with nothing and are not permitted to work here, so they must register at centres like this for whatever survival assistance they can get. Tai Jayarath is an Australian protection officer with the UNHCR. She works with refugees every day, so I asked her what sort of people they are.
Well, I think something that people don't realise is that anyone can be a refugee. From one day to the next, your life has changed. There's a diverse range of Syrians who have left Syria in search of asylum. So you'll have doctors and lawyers and nurses and teachers, as you would in Australia. For very many Syrians, none of them thought that this was going to happen to them. No one thought that they were going to leave their homes and schools and jobs and families behind. Of course, Tai, just because someone is designated a refugee, that doesn't make them eligible for resettlement in a country like Australia. So what would make them eligible? We have almost 1.1 million refugees here. The opportunity to be resettled is less than 1%. It's tiny, and the people who are resettled actually are the most vulnerable amongst the most vulnerable.
That means people who've been tortured, imprisoned or raped, or people like Marwa, who were specifically targeted by one of the warring factions. Marwa was a nurse back home and her husband worked at the law courts.
Some soldiers from ISIS dragged him from his car and told him to revoke some evidence in the terrorism cases against them, but he refused. I was at home alone with the children when 3 vehicles showed up. They broke down the door. There were 7 or 8 of them, all fully armed. They told me I would learn regret. Then they grabbed me and they slapped me and punched me. I was holding my baby Yusuf in my arms and he fell to the floor. They put Yusuf and my girl Mariam in a corner and pointed a gun at them. She was terrified. She'd never seen weapons or beatings. They put a knife to my throat and said my husband must report to them within 2 days. They told me if he doesn't show up, we will slay you in front of your children as an example to others, and then we will slay your children too. My daughter was screaming, "Don't kill Mama, don't kill Mama." The only thought going through my mind was, what will happen to my children?
Stories like Marwa's are all too common amongst the people fleeing this brutal war. I asked Tai whether people like Marwa could ever hope to recover and lead productive lives in their new countries.
At many stages in life, we can be broken, right? I mean, for example, my parents were refugees from the Indo-Chinese Refugee Crisis, and they were in a camp for 3 years. I was actually born in a refugee camp. The society around you can heal you and repair you and give you opportunities which you would never thought.
Right now, though, such dreams are a long way off for refugees struggling to survive day to day in Lebanon. As there are few formal refugee camps in Lebanon, most refugees must find shelter in bombed-out buildings or slum-like plots of vacant land. Even here, they pay rent to a landlord, and despite having no access to the formal economy, they must earn enough to feed their families. In informal settlements like this one at Shuafet, as you can see, people are living in the most basic, most unsanitary conditions. With their savings gone and their valuables sold, they really struggle for food and rent. Now, that makes them incredibly vulnerable to violence and exploitation, and in most cases, kids have to work to support their families. The war in Syria has now dragged on for 5 years, killing around 400,000 people. These kids have no hope of returning to their old lives anytime soon, and Syria's neighbours are now stretched to breaking point with refugees. To give some indication of the size of the problem, if you went down the east coast of Australia and destroyed Brisbane, then Sydney, then Melbourne, then Hobart, and made every single person homeless, that's how many Syrians have fled their homes. Turkey and Lebanon alone are home to almost 4 million refugees, compared to 1 million for the whole of Europe. Innes Wilcox is the head of the Australian Industry Group, which represents about 60,000 Australian businesses. He believes Australia is well placed to do more.
The countries we visited, Turkey and Lebanon, are doing an enormous job in trying to absorb some of that intake in the short term, but in the long term, we've got to find places for these people around the world.
Of course, most of us want to help when we see something like this, but, demographically, economically, does Australia have the capacity to help?
We absolutely have capacity in Australia. We're a nation of 24 million people with an economy that is growing. We have enormous natural resources. We have infrastructure that will allow us to accept and to absorb more people. Syria has been in crisis, and they're a country that is very sort of rich in skills we need, construction on one level and agriculture on another, but also at higher end skills. You hear a lot from lawyers and doctors and accountants, those sort of professions. They have a lot to offer to a country like Australia.
Tony Shepherd, the head of Australia's Commission of Audit, agrees that we can do more.
We have jobs in Australia, we have new jobs every year. I think we can allocate a portion of the jobs to these people as they come to Australia. I think it's the humanitarian thing to do, it's the sensible thing to do from an economic point of view, and I'm sure we can absorb them. That post-war immigration program was all about refugees, and that was in fact what got Australia going. We've done it in the past, and I'm sure we can do it in the future. The problem with a refugee in this crisis is, what is the future?
It's a question I asked so many refugees I met here, and I'm moved by the fact that after all they've been through, almost all of them hold on to hope for a better future.
I'd like Mariam to be a dentist. And I want Yusuf to be a pilot.
After so much war, all we need to succeed is safety. My grandfather came to Syria as a refugee, so if I must leave as one, I can do it.
I want the best for me and for my family and for all Syrians.
Thank you for your visit, and thank you for all those who help the Syrian people.
Right now, the Syrian people need all the help they can get. Yes, and I did want to just especially thank Billy Foster as well for shooting those beautiful pictures in Turkey and Lebanon in my refugee packages there, and also the Migration Council for facilitating that trip.
It was a
an amazing
wonderful,
story.
wonderful story.
Yeah, good, thanks.